Hello, my name is Dan Dillner. I'm a protection forester with the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation out of the Essex District Office. I cover the northwestern portion of the state for wildland fire control and insects and disease. Today's presentation for the 2020 Parks training is entitled Poison Ivy, Ticks, Hazard Trees, Emerald Ash Borer, and Firewood, otherwise known as the Great Outdoors COVID edition. Protection foresters for your area. We mark hazard trees, spray poison ivy, survey for invasive insects, and we are also the ones that would collect any confiscated firewood. Objectives for this presentation. Following this presentation, you should be able to identify poison ivy and differentiate between some of the most common look-alike plants. Learn some of the ways to protect yourselves from ticks, some of the tick-borne diseases and their prevalence, identify some common hazards in trees and know what to look out for, be able to recognize signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer and know its prevalence in Vermont, and be familiar with the FPR policy of bringing firewood into the parks and how to implement that. Okay, so first up is poison ivy, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to identify the poison ivy and then a little bit about the control program that protection foresters can do in each park. So first important thing to know about poison ivy is that it's a woody plant. The leaves fall off just like a tree each year, but the stem is woody and has extensive roots underground, and you can still get poison ivy even with the leaves off if you were to come in contact with the juice from the stem. Poison ivy, as most people know, has leaves of 3, but the important thing to remember is the middle leaf, as you can see in this picture, has a longer petiole, longer stem on it that kind of differentiates it from the other leaves. They're kind of a dark green leaf usually, kind of heavier than some other plants that we'll see in a minute. The veins kind of come off parallel in each leaf, and just get an idea of what it looks like. Here's a couple pictures. So the poison ivy produces some nice tasty berries in the late summer, midsummer, and apparently birds eat them. Apparently it's an important food for robins, and you can imagine when they eat these berries, they help spread the plant into waste areas and areas that have been cleared. A couple lookalikes here. Virginia creeper. It has 5 leaves, but the darkness of the leaf, kind of the heavy character of it, makes it look a little bit like poison ivy. It also seems to grow right with poison ivy, so they hide together. And another one that's commonly confused, hog peanut, has 3 leaves, and the center leaf kind of has a longer stem, but it's a herbaceous plant. It doesn't, it dies back each year, as opposed to the poison ivy, which is indicated here. We'll do a little quiz here. We've got 4 different pictures. Which one do you think is poison ivy? Well, if you guessed the bottom 2, you'd be right. The plant on the top left is Virginia creeper. On the top right is wild sarsaparilla, and the bottom 2 are poison ivy. On the bottom left is poison ivy, probably in June, where it's lush and just beginning to grow. The leaves often come red when they first emerge. They also turn red in the fall. The bottom right picture, the leaves are dying back a little bit towards the end of the summer, probably getting some dry conditions, and the margins are burning. All right, here's another quiz. Take a look at these plants, see if you can pick out the poison ivy. All right, so it's just the one on the bottom right. Notice how it looks different from the other pictures we saw. These leaves are kind of more oval and kind of longer. So poison ivy, no two leaves ever look the same. So the picture in the top left is some of you might recognize. I myself would not. It's common marijuana hemp plant. We've got top right is Virginia creeper. Bottom left is hog peanut, and then the bottom right is poison ivy. So spraying poison ivy. The protection foresters will come in and spray poison ivy in your parks if requested. It's important that you post notices in the park while spraying to protect the public. And it's really helpful to have someone from the park staff in uniform accompany protection foresters while they're spraying to keep visitors out of the area. It's somewhat impractical to rope off, every site that you're going to spray, but to have someone there to keep the public out. The product that we use, the glyphosate, the re-entry period is once it's dry, and I would be spraying on days that are very dry, maybe a little breeze, so it dries in minutes. Be very easy to keep visitors out according to the instructions on the label. Always communicate with the park visitors and let them know what we're doing. If anyone's upset, then we'll move on to another area and come back and in the future. Contact protection forester as early as you can. Normally I would ask by June 1st this year. Things might be a bit delayed, but as soon as you can. June is a good time to hit the poison ivy to control it. And this is a control program. It's not an eradication program. And we're not going to get rid of the poison ivy for good, especially the parks in the northwest and maybe the southeast. It's knocking it back to protect the park visitors. So having a really good map makes it so much more efficient. Instead of me walking around with a pack sprayer looking for poison ivy, I can go hit the spots and get a lot more done. It can be a lot more efficient. So make a good map when you're out there, and it will be very helpful. So any questions, please send me an email. Last year I had several parks from around the state contact me with questions. I mean, I'm not a botanist, but I know most of the common plants, and I'd be happy to, let you know real quickly what you have, if it's poison ivy or not. All right, moving on to ticks. It's important, if you have any real concerns about ticks or your health, contact your health care professionals and the Vermont Department of Health. But we're just going to talk a little bit about ticks and how to protect yourself. Prevalence of Lyme disease in the United States. You can see the Northeast is a real hotbed of Lyme disease. Each dot represents a case. Vermont, certainly the southern Vermont, southwestern Vermont, going all the way up into the northwest. Ticks are becoming very common, Lyme disease right along with it. I don't know what you guys have seen this year, but I've found that the ticks are probably the worst I've ever seen them, certainly in the northwestern part of the state where I'm mostly at. So definitely be careful. If you're out and about, you might see the American dog tick, sometimes called the wood tick. It's a larger tick than the deer tick. Legs are more brown. Thankfully, it doesn't transmit Lyme disease, but real common in Northeast Kingdom, Groton State Forest area. There's a lot of them. So watch out for those. The one we're mostly going to talk about is the deer tick, or the more appropriate name, the black-legged tick. Here's some pictures of the female. This picture in the top right, it's in the questing. So that means it's like sitting on a branch or a piece of grass waiting for something to come by, and they can hang out for a long, long time. The bottom right is a gorge tick, full of blood, ready to lay some eggs. Here's kind of shows you the life cycle of the deer tick. On the left, far left is a larva, then the next is a nymph, then an adult male and adult female. So the nymphs is what is out a lot in the spring. Unfortunately, they're really small, size of about a poppy seed or maybe a sesame seed, and they're really hard to see. and the nymphs do transmit Lyme disease. So the life cycle is a little bit confusing picture, but in the early spring, you're basically going to have a couple different life stages. You're going to have the adults that have overwintered that are going to be looking for possibly still a blood meal before they lay their eggs. You're also going to have the nymphs that have overwintered, and they're looking to feed on a deer or a small mammal or human. And both the adults and the nymphs can transmit Lyme disease. And throughout the summer, you're mostly going to see nymphs that are growing into adults, and the larvae which will be on birds and small mammals that don't attack humans or transmit Lyme disease. This kind of shows you the seasonality of Lyme disease. I mostly seem to encounter ticks in April and May, and then September, October. But if you look at where Lyme disease is, it the peak of the curve is definitely June through August. So keep that in mind when you're working in the parks. My Department of Health has this Be Tick Smart program to protect, check, remove, and watch. So we'll go through each one of those. And again, if you have concerns about ticks, you really should contact the Vermont Department of Health. And if you get one on you, contact your healthcare provider. So the first is protect yourself, and that's really one of the most, protecting yourself and checking yourself are the two most important things that you can do to keep yourself healthy. So protect yourself, avoiding areas where ticks live. So I mean, you're working in the parks, try to stay out of the brush as much as possible. If you do, make sure that you're going to be well protected. But staying on the campsites. But just because you're staying on a campsite or a trail doesn't mean you won't pick up ticks, because ticks they can be anywhere. Cover yourself up. Wear clothing. Tuck your pant legs in your boots. Wear gaiters. Use a tick repellent, which we'll talk about next. So permethrin is a tick repellent. It's a pesticide, and like any pesticide, the law is to follow the label. So it says on the label that it's not for skin. You do not apply this on your skin. You do not apply it on your clothing when you're wearing it. So follow the instructions. The parks will supply permethrin if you're going to use it properly. So hang up the clothes you want to treat outside on a day with sunny, dry, not too much wind, and treat them, let them dry, and then they should be good for the number of washes that's indicated on the can. So check yourself. Don't let the ticks hitchhike inside you on your clothing. Check your whole body. Check every crack and crevice. It's really important that this is done as soon as you come in from the outside. If you're in an area in, say, western or southwestern part of the state where Lyme disease and ticks are really, really prevalent, southern Vermont, maybe a couple times a day would be worth doing. But definitely wearing those treated clothing and making sure ticks can't crawl up your pant legs. Keep your shirts tucked in. So checking yourself is very important, and then if you do find a tick, get it off you as soon as possible. If it's been on longer than 24 hours, definitely should be contacting a healthcare provider. But when you're removing tick, grab it with some sharp tweezers right near the mouth parts, or one of those special tick removers. And often the mouth parts are going to break off, but do the best you can and get it out quickly without trying to injure the tick as much as possible. The old methods of heating a match and something like that to aggravate the tick so it'll remove is really not recommended. Evidence that they may in fact regurgitate saliva into you in the process and further infect you, so don't do that. And watch. So if you haven't had a tick bite, you want to watch yourself, keep an eye out for symptoms. There's a whole lot of aches and pains and rashes and all kinds of things that can be caused by Lyme disease. So keep a watch out for that. And again, contact your healthcare provider if you get any symptoms. I found this book to be really, really helpful from Connecticut Extension. It's online. So if you want to read more about it, it just has some really good identification and all the diseases you can get if you want to learn more about germs. Any questions? Contact me if you have some basic questions about ticks, but also contact the Vermont Department of Health. All right, so moving on to hazard trees. Again, the protection foresters are the folks that come into the parks and mark the hazard trees each season. So we're there in the fall to mark the hazard trees. Each park is done. Every area that the visitors would go to and congregate, picnic table, benches, campsites, all that sort of thing. But things happen over the winter. Just because we have already marked it doesn't mean that there's no hazards that have developed. So, and we're also human beings and we make mistakes, we miss things. So if you guys are out and about, you need to be looking up all the time. So what's a hazard tree? Well, first, to be a hazard tree, it has to have a target. So a dead tree in the woods might be a hazard if you sit under it, but if it doesn't have a target, then it's not anything that we're going to be worried about. So every time you've made a campsite or invited the visitor to come and sit on a bench, you need to be looking up and saying, is there a tree that could potentially injure this person? Those are the kind of trees we're talking about. So some things to look out for. Stress cracks, that's something that you're not easily seen, especially once the leaves come out. But when you're out and about in the parks, cleaning campsites or working, always be looking up. You're gonna look down on the ground for trash or for any hazard someone's going to trip and fall on, but also be looking over your head on the trees. So stress cracks could be formed from winter injury, heavy snow loads, ice, that kind of thing. So watch out for that, especially in trees that have many branches that come out, and especially if they're weak wood, like say box elder or Norway maple or something like that. Signs of internal decay. If you have a fruiting body, a mushroom coming out of the side of a tree, that indicates that there's some decay inside it, which could make it so that it's weakened and could potentially break off in a storm. Woodpeckers are also a great sign for internal decay. Overhead hazards, something that's going to fall down and hurt someone. So if it's broken off and just barely hanging there, and all it's going to take is a little wind for that to come down and put a hole in someone's tent or camper or car or someone's head. Dead limbs, the tree might be very healthy, might be in great shape, but a couple dead limbs. Oaks often have a lot of dead limbs that, and it may cost money to have those removed, but it's important to get those taken care of. Even if it does cost money, it's less expensive than a lawsuit or injury. Root problems. Maybe the picture on the left there, you're out cleaning sites and you notice that the dirt around the site is kind of lifted and there's some roots showing. That's a sign that sprung roots, then the tree may be coming down. Very common in shallow soils, rocky soils, or wet areas. So keep an eye out for that. Fungus, fruiting bodies coming up around the base of a tree. Another thing to look out for. Could indicate some root problems. Just some general pictures here. Storm damaged trees, obviously, that's going to be something you're going to want to have removed. The little picture on the left, bottom left there, it's two stems of the same tree that were kind of growing, and now they're pushing each other apart, creating creating included bark and possibly some decay, and the fact that the storm could easily take one of those off. So bad form, bad structure can also be a hazard, even if it isn't rotting. So any questions? Feel free to contact me or any of the protection foresters about hazard trees. I should note that there's no requirement that a protection forester comes in to mark a tree that needs to come down or give you the okay during the season. So talk to your maintenance technician and they can get the tree removed. Okay, emerald ash borer. Sure, you all heard about emerald ash borer in the news. It's in Vermont. It's been here a couple years now. It's in 11 towns, 9 counties, so it's all over the state. We call this map the fried egg map. So the center is the confirmed infested area, but we're assuming that the whole egg has emerald ash borer, even if it hasn't all been found yet. So it's very important to not move ash out of those areas during the flight season, which is after June 1st. So one of the concerns about Vermont state parks are, suppose that emerald ash borer comes into the park and all the ash is dead. How many trees would that be to remove? Well, we surveyed a couple of years ago almost 16,000 ash trees in Vermont state parks. If they died today, would be a hazard tree to be removed. So that's a lot of money. It's a big change to the park, so something to be aware of. Some symptoms and some signs of emerald ash borer. Probably the biggest one that really stands out is the picture on the left. You have woodpeckers taking the outside bark off the trees and creating this kind of reddish appearance. It really stands out, and it will really indicate that there's something going on where the woodpeckers are after the larvae of the pupae just under the bark. Kind of a close-up of some beginning flecking, we call it, on the bark of an ash. Also can have ash, dying back with the tops dead, epicormic branches, that's branches coming out the bark, indicating a stressed tree. So there's a picture of the adult emerging out of a little D-shaped hole. You're probably not going to see the D-shaped holes that easily until you've had some woodpecker activity to notice first, and then maybe if you look on closer inspection, you might see D-shaped holes, but they're pretty small, about 1/8 of an inch. This just kind of shows you the federal quarantine, the whole kind of basically the whole eastern part of the United States, and there it is again, showing where the quarantine is, and it is even out in Colorado and way up in northern Maine. Basically, is the range of ash at this point. Want to know more about it? VT Invasives is the place to go, where all the information about emerald ash borer, as well as other forest pests that we're on the lookout for, and invasive plants. Any questions, please again contact me or contact any of the protection foresters or the forest folks in Forest Health. All right, and lastly, we'll talk about firewood. So why do we not want to move firewood? Why are the park management folks making your life difficult to tell visitors they can't bring in firewood? Well, when you bring in firewood, you're bringing in a whole lot of other things besides just the wood. I did a program some years ago with some kids, and we took apart some chunks of firewood that were starting to decay. I think we found 40 different species of insects just under the bark of a few logs. So you're bringing a whole community when you bring firewood. Most of those things are probably perfectly benign, but there's quite a few things we're worried about, like, of course, emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, spotted lanternfly. So it's really important, and also it's the law. There's a law in Vermont that does not allow firewood to be brought in from out of state, and then also the slowest spread recommendations for emerald ash borer coming from infested areas. So in the parks, you're worried about firewood coming in, and you're not supposed to be moving firewood during the flight season, June 1st to September 30th, from an ash that comes from an infested area. So that's pretty difficult for park staff to decide exactly where it came from in one of those fried egg maps, or whether it was from out of state. So new this year, no firewood being brought into the parks. We're not allowing any wood coming from out of state or in state unless it's been treated, and we'll talk about that momentarily. This picture on this slide here just is some wood that was confiscated. I found in a bag from Grand Isle, I think in 2013, and it came from Yellowstone. So people are moving wood around. So when can you bring it? When can someone show up with wood and be allowed to keep it? Well, it needs to be packaged, it needs to be labeled as heat treated and certified by the USDA. So unfortunately, the person coming into your park with a truckload of firewood from a nearby town, they're not going to be allowed to keep all their firewood this year. So what do you do? So if someone brings in a firewood to camp and it's not certified USDA firewood, not heat treated, we're going to allow them to keep a quantity of the wood that can be burned on the first night for their campfire, but the rest of it needs to be exchanged. So if they bring in 10 armloads and the first night they want to burn an armload, then 9 armloads gets exchanged. So they need to be double bagged. This could potentially be a lot of work. The Protection Foresters will supply you with special bags and tags. So double bag the wood. So between the 2 bags, you put a little tag and tells you, how many bags and where they came from. We don't need people's names on it, just where it came from. And then contact your Protection Forester, and we will come and pick them up. So if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, please reach out to me, send me an email, or contact one of the Protection Foresters, the one that covers your area. We'll be more than happy to help you out and come to your park and take a look at your tree or your poison ivy. Remember to stay safe and stay protected, and that we're all in this together. Thank you.